call the meeting to order.
Budget and Finance meeting, I call it to order. First, there's a presentation from the Bondil Group.
Good evening. My name is Nick Mazza. I'm a consultant with the Bondil Group. We're a CPA firm. I don't know how much background you have on us. I'm with Tim Ball, who's also with us, who's a forensic examiner. My experience, I've been with the Bondil Group about 6 years. Prior to that, I was 20 years the county administrator in Livingston County. And prior to that, I was about 9.5 years the city manager of Cortland. And prior to that, had a variety of positions with the city of Syracuse in the budget and finance area. I'm a graduate of the Maxwell School at Syracuse University. The personnel part of the consulting engagement is primarily my undertaking, and I'll cover that initially, and then Tim will follow up as he did payroll piece as part of his forensic examination, and then did a substantial amount of work with your DSS, and I'll cover that area. I know you've got a long meeting ahead of you, so I'll try to be as brief as I can, but I also want you to know that we spent a lot of time and did a thorough job. So if I'm short, please stop and ask questions and all that. I'll get started. Basically, the areas that I looked at were health insurance, workers' comp, retiree health, overall personnel policies, your labor agreements, payroll systems, time and attendance, your deferred comp program, your third-party contracts that all are housed in the personnel and civil service department. Health insurance, we recently instituted a program of self-insurance for employees for health insurance and prescription plans. The benefits are provided through a combination of plans utilizing Blue Cross, Medicaid Advantage for your retirees over 65, ARA prescriptions, and a Canadian prescription plan. The expenses are paid monthly. The program is relatively new, but is expected to reduce overall health care costs in the long term. Montgomery County currently insures 450 active employees and 318 retiree lives.
It's 540 active employees.
540, that's right. All right, I misread it. The employee contributions toward health care are reasonable and in line with similar municipalities, where the employees share percentage they're paying. Benchmarks we use, you seem to be doing fine in that area. We made some recommendations. Some have been already instituted, and others are in the development process. First one is the personnel officer should develop a monthly budget to actual report using the county treasurer's monthly expense report as a financial basis. I believe that's underway, it's being done. Using a monthly tracking report, the county should conduct quarterly meetings with third-party administrators, face-to-face meetings, and discuss trends, large cases, unexpected claims, and engage in year-end forecasting and budget preparation activities on a quarterly basis. I believe that's done. One thing we noted that with your health insurance plan, the county currently enrolls new employees and their dependents on the honor system. By that I mean if a new employee is hired, they enroll in health insurance, they list their dependents, spouses, dependents, and there isn't any documentation required for that. We recommend the county undertake a dependent eligibility audit to verify the eligibility of dependents currently enrolled in your health insurance plan. Basically, national trends have shown that 6 to 12% of dependents in a plan that's run by the honor system are not truly eligible, and they should be removed from the plan. Additionally, the county should implement administrative procedure. Once that is done, once you are caught up and you know what you have is correct and proper, you should institute procedures where you capture that information at the time of enrollment. Birth certificates, marriage certificates, those types of things, adoption papers, divorce decrees, those kinds of things you should capture at the time of enrollment. Now you're doing it basically on the honor system. the trend throughout the state. I just would say NISHIP, which is one of the state plans, they do this on a regular basis. So it's not unique to you, but we find in a lot of places that your system probably needs a good looking at there. Currently, this is already being done with your Teamsters union plan. You have a plan that's run through your Teamsters union, and they require this because they're paying the bill. So just something you ought to look at. It's called the dependent eligibility audit. We can work with you more on that should you be interested. The county should develop plans and procedures to establish a health insurance reserve fund similar to what you're doing with the workers' comp program. Basically, what we've observed is that when you had excess, underspent your line items, maybe in the workers' comp program, it appears that the county transferred that excess money into a workers' comp reserve, which is an excellent practice. And when we did this, you had $2.3 million. Now that you're self-insured for health insurance, you ought to be looking at the same practice. If you underspend your health insurance lines, take that money and put it in a reserve. Eventually, you may be able to reduce costs, and it's your hedge against maybe some large losses and claims of that nature. So it's something you ought to consider, and I think a year end this year might be, if you have excess dollars, start to create a health insurance reserve, similar to the workers' comp. In the workers' comp we looked at, you operate a countywide self-insured program, which includes the county, towns, villages, the city of Amsterdam, except the police, and many of your volunteer fire departments, or maybe all of them. The county purchases excess workers' comp liability, which is good, and workers' compensation third-party liability coverage. So you basically have excess coverage for the catastrophic claims, which is a good, well-managed program. We feel that the program is being well-managed and run. Your third-party administrators, personnel are doing a good job, and you have excellent reserves. We note of $2.3 million at the end of 2014. That's a very good outcome. Again, the recommendations are similar to what they should be with the health insurance program. Develop monthly budget to actual using the treasurer's reports, and use the monthly tracking report. Using the monthly tracking report, the county should conduct quarterly meetings with your third-party administrator to discuss expense trends, large case developments, ones that may hit your insurance, unexpected claims, potential buyouts. If I'm talking over your head, stop me, but if someone is long-term on workers' comp, they got a permanent disability to buy that out and avoid large future costs. That's something the quarterly meeting should discuss and look at. Return to work programs, another way to get people back early if they're well managed. Light duty assignments, safety and training programs are critical. I guess some of that's already started. Second injury fund claims. Make sure that your second injury fund, if someone you hired was injured in a previous job, maybe they have a bad back, you knew that when you hired them, they re-injure that back, you can apply to the state second injury fund to get reimbursed for your costs. But you got to make sure that those things are being done, that the applications are going in on a timely basis. 207 applications, 207C and A for your police and your fire. Again, you may be able to apply for reimbursement for any or all of those costs, but you need to make sure you're doing it. Outside contracts. A review of all third-party personnel contracts was completed, aside from the agreements related to health and workers' comp that I've already talked about. I reviewed all of those agreements relating to long-term disability, vision, dental, EAP, employee physicals, your CDL, badge and time clock maintenance, National Employers Council, Incorporated, People Systems, public safety psychological testing, your labor attorney, safety eyewear, and the whole, it basically was all of them. With one exception, all of the agreements seem to be appropriate and the pricing appeared to be reasonable. We are recommending the termination of an agreement with the National Employers Council Incorporated, People Systems in Syracuse, New York. Upon review and discussion of this agreement, we have found that the services appear to be duplicate of many other services being provided by the county's labor attorney and current personnel office. Also, many of the provisions of the agreement are not being performed, and some are being done by other contractors. The key provision of this agreement is representation in unemployment hearings. Upon discussion with the personnel officer, this function can be easily transferred to the personnel officer with the assistance from the county's labor attorney, which is currently being done, I think, anyway, when appropriate. This will eliminate the need for this contract and result in an annual savings of $8,400. And I believe it's been done. That alone paid for my contract. And ongoing, you won't be spending that money in the future. The retiree health insurance, which is an issue for all localities, how's that going? The county provides certain levels of health insurance for retirees. These benefits are provided throughout by Montgomery County Local Law Number 4 for the year 1993. That's basically the legal basis for how you pay your retiree health insurance. The local law denotes eligibility for coverage. It breaks out the tiers from Tier 1 to Tier 2 at 5 years of service, and I don't think you have many people left probably retiring out of Tier 2. They're probably already retired. There may be some hanging around. There's always an exception, but not a lot. It's not substantial. It's not significant. And for Tiers 3 and 4 at 10 years of service and other New York agencies. The resolution is old and is silent to Tiers 4 and 6. It really should be updated to be current. You're kind of doing it on past practice, but it is silent to Tiers 5 and 6. And generally, employees pay 25% of the premium for themselves and 50% for dependents. Our recommendation is that generally the employee contributions for health insurance are appropriate and in line with other counties. That, the 25 and 50% are in line. However, Montgomery County's practice crediting time with other ERS employers is a practice we have not found in other jurisdictions. We believe this practice is overgenerous and creates a financial obligation to Montgomery County and its taxpayers that in the long term is unsustainable financially.
Excuse me.
We recommend that
Sorry, is that sick time? To pay
No,
back?
that is not sick time.
Or the...
Let me finish and I'll
Okay,
answer your
sure.
question, okay? We recommend that Montgomery County adopt a new local law that at a minimum requires 10 years of full-time continuous service with Montgomery County for retiree health insurance benefits. We recommend ceasing the practice of including years of service with other employers to satisfy eligibility requirements in the retiree health insurance program of Montgomery County. Also, I'm being a little repetitive here, that Tiers 5 and 6 be included in the new local law. What you have is people have the ability to be employed at Montgomery County for very short periods of time and qualify for full retiree health insurance. For example, theoretically, I could work for a school district for 9 years, come to work for the county for 1 year, get credit for those 9 years at the school district, and the county pays retiree health insurance for the rest of my life. I've never seen that anywhere else. I really believe that 10 years of service should be with Montgomery County. 10 years seems like a reasonable sum, reasonable number of years, fair number of years, in line with what other places do, but I've never seen where one can work elsewhere, come to work for the county and bring all that time in that they worked at maybe a town or a school district, a state, any other system, part of the system. That is very generous and I think financially unsustainable. I've never, that's something you really need to consider. I know it's tough at times, but you can do it for new hires. There's ways to do it to stop it from occurring in the future. And ultimately, there'll be substantial savings. Any questions? I'm going to turn things over to Tim now, but I'll answer any questions you may have.
Can we get a printed copy of that report?
Sure. That's okay? Yeah. Yeah. Tim is going to cover the payroll system. I know there's been a lot of discussion about it already. And then get into the issues that we dealt with at social service.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, guys, my name is Tim Ball. As Nick said, I'm a certified fraud examiner, but that's about half of my role. The rest of the time I do a lot of government consulting with municipalities of varying sizes, including counties. And a lot of that consulting work is in different departments all throughout county government. So in this particular instance, Matt asked if we take a special look at payroll. It was kind of a hot spot for the county. There was a lot of issues going on. And so we took that on ourselves to do, and we did some walkthroughs of the procedures and interviewed some people that are involved in the process, and I'm just going to share with you a few of the things. We touched a little bit on the AS400 system already, so I'm not going to reintroduce that, but I'll kind of discuss what our take was on it as well. So a couple of things that we did is we literally walked through the process. We talked to the people that are involved in your payroll process, and we looked at the systems that are in use. We worked with Dan's office to take a look at some of those systems and some of the limitations of it. One of the things we noted is all the locations within the county use time clocks, primarily all of them, and require employees to enter their start and finish time for each day. That's phenomenal. It's a great thing. Keeps everyone pretty honest. It's pretty hard to fool the time clock, so we're pretty happy with that. And aside from the use of time clocks, however, the rest of the payroll process is pretty manual, in that the county employees, the supervisors, the managers, and even the payroll clerk are manually entering and approving a significant amount of time of information in a kind of a non-user-friendly interface. And that interface is obviously the AS400 system that we talked about. But again, the reason that some of that is not a user-friendly interface is because there are applications that build on top of using AS400. AS400 is kind of what we call it, but you can correct me if I'm technically. AS400 is kind of the database. It's the underneath. It's the web piece of the system. There are a lot of applications that build on top of AS400 that actually manage the data and make it a lot easier for people to use the interfaces each day. So one of the things we noted was a lot of people clicking a lot of mouse buttons and a lot of screens and entering a lot of hand data to put your payroll in every week. And God forbid one of these people is out absent, goes out on an extended medical leave. There wasn't a lot of coverage, and there wasn't a lot of people that had the skill to replace them if they were gone. So again, very manual process at that point. The other thing was we saw a couple areas where AS400 wasn't being used to track, and one of them was the non-bargaining longevity awards were kept separately on an Excel spreadsheet. I'd never really seen this, and I wasn't too excited to see it, that one person was kind of manually keeping all of these awards off separately and inputting them as they go. Again, if this person potentially goes out sick and there's not a good replacement, someone might not be manning the ship as far as keeping these updated and make sure they're correct. The same thing goes for Kathy Borst's job as a payroll coordinator. She was solely responsible for a lot of the stages in the payroll process. At the time that we were here, someone was being trained as a backup, and I know that the payroll process has kind of shifted into the treasurer's office, so I know that there's some changes. But at the time I was extremely concerned. I said, Kathy, have you ever been out for longer than a week? Like, who the heck does payroll if you're not here? And she said, well, I still do it, even when I'm not here. So that was, it was kind of a scary thing for a large county with a lot of employees. A lot of people are relying on the payroll to go through. And then the other issue was the county is providing payroll services to some of the neighboring municipalities. And I'm going to touch on that in a minute as well. So some of the recommendations we talked about was to obtain some counsel from external professionals regarding system upgrades and application upgrades within the AS400 system. And I think that, Matt, you're all over that. There are some other, Gemco is an agency that we've worked with. That's a subsidiary of our Bonadillo group that actually just does this. They focus on this. They go to counties, they look at systems like this, and they help both strategize in putting in applications that work significantly better under the systems that you have. Their main goal is not to come in and say you have to buy a $700,000 piece of equipment. Their main goal is to come in and say, okay, you're a county, you have a budget, we kind of know what you're up against. Let's look at the next 10 years and see what makes the most sense for you. And in their case, they're saying, hey, there's a couple applications that we can put in, some training that can be done. You're going to be good for a while. It's not like we're just patching over and hoping that everything works. We're actually putting in systems that are going to be better. So that's the first thing. The next thing is we just said review the payroll process and just look at it and say, what can we do that makes this less manual? What can we do so that Kathy is not the only person that's inputting things, and that if she were to go out on any kind of extended leave or wanted to take a vacation outside the United States, could payroll still be processed? So that's another thing that I believe that's been done, especially looking at moving it into the treasurer's office. So that's phenomenal. The next thing is to develop official policies and procedures manual for the payroll process. Again, this has been part of the transfer into the treasurer's office. I kind of just asked, I said, is there anything that I could read that could tell me how payroll gets from point A to point B? And Kathy pulled out a huge notebook and said, yep, here's all my procedures, I got them all documented, it's great. And I said, this is phenomenal, but it's not very formal. And if I had to sit down in your place tomorrow and process payroll, I don't think I could pull it off. So getting that to be a little bit better. And then the last thing that Dan touched on was investigating the cost risk benefit of processing payroll for the local municipalities within the county. I think it's a practice that's been being done for a significant amount of time. I know that the towns and the other municipalities that use this service rely on the county to provide that payroll. I'm not saying that you should stop doing it, but I'm saying you should investigate it. You should look at the cost, do an analysis of how much it actually costs the county to process it, compare it to if you outsourced it, and see where you lie in the middle. And also analyze the risk of you guys processing payroll for other municipalities. And if something were to go wrong with your systems and you couldn't process their payroll, what would they say about it? You know, what would the issue be? So you're really putting yourself out there with these municipalities. And that kind of finishes off the payroll part of it. Is there any questions related to that review? Go ahead.
Have you looked into how many times it's been a project?
Well, we asked multiple times, and there was I know Kathy and another individual who I can't think of who does the, who was it?
The programming or the actual person inputting?
The input, Katie, right? They had a lot of issues where there was things that AS400 was supposed to do, and it was set up to do it correctly, and then Dan just didn't do it. It just sometimes it wasn't updating the buckets like it was supposed to, and those things, again, with that Excel spreadsheet scared me because things weren't getting updated correctly. There were times where some employees had been paid too much or too little, hadn't gotten their bucket increase on time, and those are just things, they're fixable, and the county fixed them the minute they found them. However, they're unnecessary. They shouldn't be happening. You know, we're in a stage of the game in 2015 where most of this stuff is electronic. Manual errors like that shouldn't be occurring anymore, and I think that we can get you guys to the point where it's not.
Tim, can I just
Absolutely.
real quick? One thing, and when we sat down as a team to discuss this with Gemco, actually, what we found is that the primary programmer on the AS400 oftentimes takes it upon herself to learn what she needs to do to the AS400 to ensure that it's accurate and reliable. But she might spend 3 days figuring out how to do it, and then you spend the time doing it, when some of the training and the applications that we can provide can take away all that time that she's basically teaching herself how to learn a new program or and bear with me, I'm certainly not a technical computer person, but a lot of these issues can be solved by training. And what we found, Joe, is that we are then manually verifying what's coming out of the computer. So not only are we looking at, okay, here's what the computer is saying, but just to be sure, because we don't want to make any mistakes, and we happen to have someone who's certifying per payroll who really wants to be sure, we're then manually checking, and that's where we started to find some errors. Now, I'm not saying these are massive errors. We're not spending, we're not giving somebody $30,000 more, but we want everything to be on the money, right on point, and there's a mix up there between what the computer was spitting out and what the manual portion was saying. So by implementing some of these things, we're going to hopefully get them to match, so then we can back off on that labor that it takes to verify things and have that trust in the system. And that makes sense.
Absolutely. Is there any other questions? Okay. The other part that Bonavio, that we've been involved in, that I'm also overseeing, is the consulting work that we've been doing in the Department of Social Services. To give you a little background before I have Mike get going here, we're doing this kind of work in 18 other counties in New York State. I have a team specific to Department of Social Service consulting. Some of them are actual caseworkers that started in the Department of Social Service and went back to college, got their degrees, and now work for me as consultants. And what we do is we go into these Department of Social Service of all different sizes in New York State, from some of the largest counties to some of the smallest counties, and we work on efficiencies. We make sure that they're complying with the law and everything that they need to get these benefits to the people in the county. And we look at staffing, and we look at kind of how things are being done and making sure that they match with the way that the rest of the counties are doing in the state. And we try to get these agencies to be as efficient as possible. And one of the great things when we can start one of these programs is some significant buy-in from the commissioner. And in this case, when we started Montgomery, Mike was all about it. It was a great program. We started right out on the right foot, and we were able to go through program by program and just meet with the people and see what's going on out there. And so, Mike, I'm going to let you cut in and kind of start it out, and then we'll talk about some of the things we've done.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, we're 8 months into this relationship, which started, back in February, I think, when we first had a sit-down conference. And I was on board when Matt told me what he was thinking about doing. I was on board right from the beginning, because what we get, and you should be thankful as a legislative body and the public, is that we get audited all the time. We have auditors here all the time. We're getting ready for one, we're getting through one, or somebody's here. And that's good. I like audits, because they're about compliance. It's all about compliance. They come in with their measuring tools, and they measure, and then they get in their stuff and they go. But many of the times, they don't give us any help on process improvement or, experience from other counties and that sort of thing. So the consulting, accounting versus, or auditing versus consulting is definitely a difference. And like I said, I get audited all the time, and sometimes the worst that happens in an audit is I have an outdated poster on the wall. We can all live with that, and haven't gone out in handcuffs yet, so the money's always right too, and you should be happy about that. But what Bonadil brings to us is they do consulting, and they look at processes, and they look at workflow, and they analyze what we're doing, and they suggest other ways of doing it because they work with smaller counties or counties like us. They didn't come in and say, up in Erie County they do it this way, because what they do in Erie is completely different from what we do in Montgomery County because they have 1,800 employees in DSS. So they bring that expertise. Kelly Smeal, who's not here tonight, the project lead for Bonadil, has worked very closely with my staff and my 3 directors here. They've interviewed a cross-section of those employees about what they do, how they do it, and what their challenges are. And it's been a very good relationship. I haven't had anybody at my door crying, or wanting to open door policy with me because somebody is, beating them up. Everybody saw the movie Office Space, right? Right? No? You need to look at that, all right? That's consultants come into an IT. Yeah. Well, I think actually communicating to the staff that we were bringing in a consulting firm that was going to help with processes, it went very well, and it's gone very well. So they've hit some really very complex areas. We're going to hear, I think Tim's going to give us a look at what areas they looked at and what they found. So I would like to thank Missy Shuffleberg, my confidential secretary, because she arranged all the interviews and all the meeting spaces for the last 8 months. And she's done a fantastic job working with Kelly. I've got a lot of compliments about Bonadil, about how they work with us. So you're gonna hear some more about this tomorrow night in our budget session, because some of the ideas that we're taking and some of the recommendations are straight out of what we've learned in the last 8 months. I think that's important. We're saving some money too, money that we would have realized had we not looked at things differently as far as process.
Yep.
With that, I'm looking forward to the project continuing. We're looking at some other programs. And what was nice in the beginning when we first sat down is we decided together what areas we wanted to focus on. Where we could get low-hanging fruit, where we could get some reimbursement from the federal government. So they worked with us. They didn't come in and say, here's what we're going to do. And that was important for my team because at the same time, remember back in February and March, we were really kind of setting up this whole stage to move to Amsterdam. And I told them, I said, geez, I'm in the middle of a huge process right now, splitting my staff. And we know that was the first for this county. And they've helped us with it. They've been able to come in and say, hey, you're doing this, and we hopefully will be able to have them look at it when we get a little more time on our belt, is how we're doing with Amsterdam. How's that working? How's the processes working there? So I look forward to more from them. I'll turn it over to Tim.
Okay, so I'm gonna briefly go just through the areas that we've looked at the DSS. I'm gonna do kind of an overview, ask any questions that you want. Some of this DSS stuff is pretty technical, and a lot of the work that we did actually involved individual cases and a lot of confidential type of information. So I'm not gonna share a lot of specifics, but I'll share a lot of overview of what we did and some of the programs we looked at. I'm going to start out by doing the big one that Mike and I decided to look at first, which was actually foster care. Foster care is a very complex program. It's a very important program to many of the county DSSs. It obviously involves children that are placed into foster homes. And although getting those children placed in the homes and getting them into a correct environment to help them out is extremely important, on the back end, the funding of that is extremely important, because putting a child in a foster care home can cost a significant amount of money. It can cost everywhere from $10,000 to $100,000 a year in local share to place these children into foster care. And there's a few specific things that start an eligibility piece that can make that local share or it can make it federal share. A big difference to the county. So one of the things I talked with Mike about is we had been doing these foster care analysis around the state and many other agencies, and I was finding that agencies weren't taking an aggressive enough approach to the eligibility to make sure that these kids, if they were eligible for the federal government to pay for them in foster care, what are the things that the county had to do? And just like many of the other counties I worked with, Montgomery was very similar. They were taking somewhat of a less aggressive approach because a federal audit for what's called 4E funding on these foster cares is a scary thing to go through. And many of the workers that are processing these cases are scared to sometimes make calls on eligibility when they could be federally audited within the next year and get dinged because they processed them wrong. So what we do is we go in and we kind of bolster those efforts. I'm actually really proud to say that based on this focus on eligibility, we went through and relooked at every single case, didn't we? Every single foster care case and every single foster care child that you had in care in the last 2 years, right?
Correct.
Which is when we could potentially reclaim benefits. From that program, we were able to recognize for your county $447,000 in federal reimbursement that you might not otherwise have recognized. I think a piece of it you would have recognized eventually, but they were pretty far behind, and there were other cases that had been processed as local share. We reopened them up with the federal government and are requesting that federal reimbursement. So $447,000, I think that's a phenomenal achievement. And that's not just us. That's us going in with your people and your individuals in the DSS and saying, look, let's change the way that we look at these. You know, let's do these together. And Robin was able to take her staff and really start hammering down on these cases and finalizing a lot of them differently. Through that, we also looked at the way that these cases were being done in the past and said, okay, if they weren't recognizing as much federal share as they should have, how should we reorganize the eligibility of these cases so that they are getting done like that? And one of the things that we did is we worked with Robin's team to kind of reprioritize how eligibility is performed and who's doing it. So I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we put an actual eligibility type specialist in that role to...
We put a caseworker in that role as opposed to an examiner.
Right. In this case, an examiner is really interested in getting the kids into care, getting them into the corrected care. But if you take the eligibility piece away from that, now you have a person who's really interested in making sure that eligibility is accurate. It's making sure that you're getting the right financial documents from the parents when the child is removed from the home and making sure that the right things are set in court so that this child can be eligible for federal funding and so on and so forth. So now I think going forward, Montgomery County is not going to have that issue where we're missing out on federal funding. I think going forward, we're going to nail it right on the head, which is really good, and that's one of the things that we're happy to help this county provide. With all of that, the staff was very helpful, and we provided Mike with a lot of feedback on things that he could do to keep it up and keep going forward. And Mike is now going to keep a pretty close watchful eye on that federal funding to make sure that it doesn't get to that spade again. Another thing we looked at is actual child care. We just looked at the child care team and said, okay, there's a couple individuals in this team doing a bunch of things, but they have duties in child care, you know, the first 2 hours a day, and then they're over here doing another thing. What we did is we just kind of broke down their day and we said what's important to each of these departments, and we've got them categorized better. And the other thing is we actually looked at how accurate their work was in performing eligibility for child care services, and in some cases they were lacking because they had too many other things on their desk. So we were able to kind of reprioritize some of those things. We moved some things to some other departments. We looked at the chronic care. I don't know how familiar you guys are with chronic care and what it is, but basically if an individual comes in and qualifies to go into a nursing home, it's very important. The DSS has a very important role in looking at their resources and their income to see how much Medicaid is going to be responsible for to pay for their care in the nursing home and how much money they have in their estate that could pay for that before Medicaid has to. It has a big to-do about how much of that local share has to pay for this nursing home care. I'll give you an example. If an individual who's an elderly gentleman comes in and applies and goes into the nursing home and on his application doesn't say that he has a home in Florida, when he eventually passes away, the kids could inherit that home. The county would have paid for his nursing home care the entire time, not knowing that he may have a $300,000 property in Florida that could have been leveraged to pay for that care first before Medicaid does. Chronic care is an important issue to the county. Mike's teams were doing a phenomenal job of processing these chronic care cases, doing a nice job looking back at the finances over the 5-year period and doing a nice job investigating those. However, some of the things that we helped them with was getting their procedures all in line. We had a few caseworkers that were processing these cases, these large, extensive cases, but they were all processing them in their own way, in their own non-type of uniform way of doing it. The fear is that if one of those workers goes out and the other workers have to pick up that case, would they be able to process it and would it be timely? The other key here is timely processing. If you have nice uniform ways of processing a case in place, you get cases done on time. If you don't, some of these workers would get bogged down and they wouldn't process the cases in time. Before you know it, the nursing home's calling and saying, hey, we got a person in this bed who you haven't given us an eligibility for, who's paying for them in the bed. You start getting some communication. And I'm sure you've probably gotten those calls in the past, right? Those are things that you don't want out of the community, and you want to make sure that your chronic care team is able and is provided with the tools to process these cases correctly. Within that, I think, did we provide you guys some training in chronic care?
Not yet.
But I think
we were talking about the tracking device that we're
Yep.
designing.
So one of the things that my professionals will do is take a look at the chronic care cases and see where some of the training is missing, and we'll provide that to your workers. That's part of our quality control contract that we're in right now. My favorite area to look at, and this is the one I'm going to finish with today, is fair hearings. Fair hearings, for those who aren't familiar, if a person comes in and applies for any type of service within the Department of Social Services, and they don't feel that they're either treated correctly, fairly, or they're maybe denied those services and they don't feel that they should have been, they can call what's called a fair hearing. And they can go in front of an administrative law judge and they can basically argue their side of the case and say, hey, I came in and applied for these services and I was denied. I don't think I should have been denied. Or, hey, I came in and applied for these services and I was strung along for so long that I decided I gave up and now I need those services. I like to look at fair hearings because it tells me how the county is doing in processing these cases. Because obviously if they're not processing them correctly, these individuals that are applying for the services will go to fair hearing, and the fair hearing judge will say, hey, Montgomery County, you didn't do this right. You know, these people deserve the service. So I look at fair hearing results for the last, I think I looked at the last 12 months to see kind of as a benchmark of how the county is doing. I'm pretty happy to report that Mike's teams were doing really, really well. There was only one thing, there was one issue, the job stop law, there was one minor issue that involves some of the AL judge or the judges saying, yeah, you didn't process this case right. But most of the other cases were being done correctly. One of the things I recommended to Mike to do is to try to not let them go to hearing. If someone goes to call a hearing, call that individual on the phone, take the time and say, hey, why are you calling a hearing? Why don't you come into the DSS and we'll figure this out before we have to sit in front of a judge and figure it out. Many times the people just want you to call them and say, hey, what's the issue? What's the problem with your application? Maybe we can reopen it. Maybe you just didn't get a piece of documentation at a time. The whole point is to avoid going in front of a judge and having them tell you that it wasn't wrong, because now it's recorded in the state record, and also it didn't need to get to that point. The whole idea of your DSS is to provide services to people that deserve it. So if this individual deserves it and you're disqualifying them on a technicality because they didn't provide a form on time, you need to avoid that. So that was one of the things we talked about. The other thing we talked about is using hearings as training tools. So if an individual worker was in charge of that application and then that person got denied and they went to hearing, we said, take that worker, put them in the hearing with the fair hearings officer. Let them sit in front of a judge and listen to the way that that case is read, how the notes apply to the case, and what the judge has to say. It's a great opportunity for workers to sit and say, okay, well, I was doing that for a little while, but I guess if it goes to fair hearing, a judge is not going to accept that, so I better change the way that I'm looking at that case. So it was one of the training tools that we offered, and Mike said, you guys are going to implement that like very soon. So those are a very good smattering of the areas that we've been through. We have a couple other areas coming down the line. We've also done a lot of work with the New Amsterdam location, looking at the setup and how the intake model is working. I'll be happy to report on that later on in the year or towards the end of the contract. As we come to the close, I'm going to spend the last month kind of going back through the changes that I've been talking to Mike about. Mike and I talk about every month it's been, I think. And actually going back through and making sure that Mike told me he's going to do it, it's going to get done. That's usually the last month that we spend in the contract, and it's basically the monitoring phase. I'd be happy to come back and report at the end of the contract if you guys would like to talk about the other achievements. The good news is that with all the savings that you had in federal funds from just the 4E program, you're more than paid for the cost of having me here for an entire year. And that's always my goal, is to have cost savings so that you don't have to recognize the cost. So thank you so much for having me. Is there any questions?
I always usually like to wait for my questions afterwards and privately, but I know that some of the laws with different states change, but like when you said Florida, they can usually keep their house, but they have to be a resident in Florida. So they come back up here, and unfortunately, they have to go into senior living. That's when that house would come into play. Would the lawyers then have to, are you advising the team in that with the chronic care?
Chronic care, I'll tell you this, chronic care is one of the most complex areas that the
Yeah.
NSS agency has to handle. It's funny, when we first started taking a look at this like 7 years ago, I thought, CPAs aren't doing this? How is this responsibility being put on the workers? And a lot of times now, with the new laws, attorneys that are representing these individuals with older family members are actually putting the money into trusts and other ways to try to hide the money so that it's not able to be used lawfully to pay for this care. So one of the things we just try to help these workers with as much as we can, you know, if there's a trust, if there's properties out of state, with the law, and help them process it and help them request the correct information so that they can process the case. It's not easy. It is not easy. Chronic care is, like I said, one of the more difficult areas. And the fact that we looked at this county, and I don't remember there being very many cases over the 3-month limit, which is phenomenal. Because right now I'm in a bunch of other counties where they have like 400 cases in their backlog that they can't get through. Montgomery County was fairly caught up. So you're in pretty good shape. Again, Montgomery County's been a great county to work with because we didn't come in here because there was an issue. We came in here because Mike wanted to get things even better from where you were before. And to be honest, we haven't found any issues. We've just found ways that we can increase efficiency and allow all of Mike's people to do their jobs better. That's it. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Good night, thank you.
Okay, good night.
Go Syracuse.
Like your tie.
I tried to run home, you know.
What I'm going to do is I have 2 resolutions, and then I'm going to adjourn on this and take a break. Okay? I'm having a little trouble getting up which one has the resolution. Oh, okay. Okay, I have a resolution approving the abstracts of the audited claims. Can I have a sponsor and a second? Martin? Barbara? Any discussion? Move it to full board?
What?
Resolution authorizing the county executive to enter in a release and satisfaction. I believe the county attorney is going to explain this.
Yeah, is there, would I sponsor in a second?
Oh, okay,
first, and then-
okay, can I have a sponsor in a second? Bob, Duke?
Okay. So, if you'd like, we could go into executive session on this. Or I can just kind of briefly discuss what it involves a potential settlement of a claim that the county has, so.
The wishes of the board?
I'm trying to think of, did we discuss this already one time?
Yes.
It looks like this is a pretty favorable settlement that we got under, I think, best of circumstances, given what has happened. So perhaps executive session is not necessary. I think this is a good settlement, and we should just get it done.
Okay. Well, you guys all have the resolution in front of you, so you can see what the terms are. But it's that essentially there was a judgment that Montgomery County got against a company and an individual who had guaranteed one of the county loans. This judgment has been sitting out there for a little while. We had a settlement offer. We've gone back and forth on negotiating. And at this point, we have the proposed settlement is above the terms of what the initial judgment was. So, so if you want to just review the resolution, and I'm happy to answer any other questions that you might have.
Any discussion? Any questions? Hearing none, we'll move it to full board.
Full board.
Full board? Okay, very good, thank you. And before I adjourn, you have a packet, everybody's got a packet for the auction, for the RFPs. There is a grading sheet if you choose to do that, and then come back with your recommendations. This is for the auction property. 3 companies, I believe, gave proposals. So we will be approving one of them next month, so that gives you a little time. Other than that, anyone else have anything else? Motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
Ryan, Barbara? All in favor?
Aye.
And at this time, I'd like to take a